I'm Audrey, 34, and until that text message lit up my phone, I thought I had my life figured out. My career as a financial analyst in Chicago was thriving. My condo was my sanctuary, and family drama was something I managed from a comfortable distance. Then came those words from my sister Brooke. I'm quitting my job, you'll take care of us while I figure things out. Before I could even respond, my doorbell rang. There stood Brooke, her 8-year-old son Dylan, and enough luggage for a month-long stay. What I didn't know then was that this unexpected arrival would unleash a family storm I never saw coming. Before I continue this roller coaster story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like button if you've ever had a family member blindside you with their drama. Subscribe for more real-life stories like this one. Trust me, you'll want to see how this unexpected visitor turned my life upside down. The sound of rolling suitcase wheels against my hardwood floors made me wince. My immaculate condo, all neutral tones, minimalist decor, and not a single thing out of place was about to be invaded. "Dylan, put your backpack anywhere," Brooke said already, kicking off her shoes and heading straight for my kitchen. Audrey always has the good snacks. I watched as Dylan carefully placed his worn backpack beside the door, his eyes scanning my apartment with curiosity but hesitation. At 8 years old, he was remarkably well-behaved compared to his mother, who was already rummaging through my refrigerator. "Brooke, we need to talk about this," I said, closing the door. "You can't just text me you're quitting your job and expect me to support you. That's not how adult life works." Brooke emerged with a container of my expensive, cold-pressed juice. God, Audrey, always so uptight. "This is what family does for each other. Remember when Mom and Dad paid for your college? Same thing." It wasn't remotely the same thing, but that was classic Brooke. In our family dynamic, she'd always been the golden child despite her chaos. I was 2 years into my first job when our parents helped her with nursing school, convinced she was finally getting her life together. Meanwhile, I'd worked 2 jobs to put myself through college, something Brooke conveniently forgot. "Where will we sleep?" she asked, flopping onto my white couch shoes, now back on her feet and dangerously close to my throw pillows. "Brooke, I have one bedroom." "This place isn't set up for a child," I gestured around at my glass coffee table with sharp corners, open concept kitchen with accessible knife block, and complete absence of anything kid-friendly. "Dylan can take the couch, I'll bunk with you." "Just like when we were kids," she said, as if this were a slumber party rather than an adult imposing on another adult's life. "What happened with your job? You've been at Memorial for what, 3 years?" I asked, trying to understand the situation. Brooke's expression darkened momentarily before she waved her hand dismissively. "Nursing is brutal these days. Burnout is real. I just need some time to figure out my next move." Something about her explanation felt rehearsed hollow. I'd known my sister long enough to sense when she wasn't telling the whole truth. "How long are you planning to stay?" I asked, dreading the answer. "Just until I figure things out," she replied vaguely. "A few weeks, maybe a month, no big deal." I noticed Dylan had barely spoken, standing awkwardly by the door as if afraid to fully enter the apartment. When I looked closely, I realized his clothes were slightly too small, his sneakers worn through at the toes. "Did you bring clothes for Dylan's school supplies?" I asked. "We grabbed the essentials," Brooke said, though the essentials apparently included her extensive skincare collection. I could see peeking from her toiletry bag, but only one small duffel for Dylan. When Dylan went to use the bathroom, I confronted Brooke more directly. "I can help you find another job. I know people in hospital administration. But you need a plan, Brooke. You can't just... Not everyone has their life color-coded and scheduled like you, Audrey," she snapped. "Some of us actually deal with real problems. While you've been climbing the corporate ladder and building your perfect little life, I've been raising a child alone." There it was, the guilt trip, right on schedule. Brooke had mastered the art of deflection. "You disappeared on us, you know," she continued, her voice taking on the wounded quality that always worked on our parents. "Left for college and barely came back. Mom still has your bedroom exactly as you left it, but you're too busy for more than holiday visits. Now when I need my big sister for once, you're acting like I'm asking for a kidney. I felt the familiar squeeze of family obligation tightening around my chest. The implied accusation of abandonment, though unfair, hit its mark. I had intentionally created distance, building a life away from the chaos that seemed to follow Brooke and the enabling behavior of our parents. 1 week, I said firmly. You can stay 1 week while we figure out next steps. But you need to be actively job hunting, Brooke. I'll help with your resume, connect you with recruiters, whatever you need to get back on your feet. Brooke's face brightened instantly, the wounded act vanishing. You're the best sis, she exclaimed, pulling me into an unwanted hug. Dylan and I will barely be in your way, promise. As she released me and headed toward my bedroom to get settled, I already regretted my decision. Behind her cheerful demeanor, I sensed a calculated plan, but I couldn't yet see how elaborate it truly was. 1 week, I told myself. Just 1 week to help them get back on their feet. I could handle anything for 7 days. Little did I know, Brooke had no intention of leaving anytime soon, and her arrival wasn't the impulsive decision she'd made it seem. This was merely the opening act of a performance she'd been rehearsing for months with me, cast as the unwitting supporting role. 2 weeks had stretched into 15 days of Brooke's temporary stay, and any semblance of my normal life had vanished. My morning routine of yoga and meditation had been replaced by stepping over Dylan's makeshift bed on the couch and discovering Brooke had used the last of my coffee. Again. I need to run to the store, Brooke announced one morning as I prepared for a critical presentation. Can I borrow $40 just until my final paycheck comes through? It was the third time that week she'd asked for money, each request attached to a different excuse. The final paycheck explanation was wearing thin. Brooke, we talked about this, I said, checking the time. I was already running late. I thought you were submitting applications yesterday. I did, she insisted, though I'd noticed she'd spent most of the day watching reality shows while scrolling through her phone. But places take forever to call back. And Dylan needs lunch money. The mention of Dylan was strategic. Brooke knew I wouldn't refuse something for her son. Despite the chaos his mother brought into my home, I'd grown fond of the quiet, thoughtful boy who apologized for taking up space and helped clean without being asked. There was a sadness about him that broke my heart. Fine, I sighed, handing her 2 20s from my wallet. But we need to talk tonight about your job search progress. Brooke snatched the cash with a quick "thanks, you're a lifesaver" before disappearing out the door, leaving Dylan behind as usual. You don't have to go to school today, I asked him, surprised. Dylan looked up from the book he was reading. One from my own collection. Mom says I can skip today because my teacher is mean. A red flag immediately went up. Does your teacher know you're staying in Chicago now? Have you been missing a lot of school? His hesitation told me everything. We move around sometimes, he finally said. Mom says school systems are all different anyway, so it doesn't matter. I sat beside him, my work momentarily forgotten. Dylan, how long has your mom been planning to leave her job? He shrugged, eyes fixed on the book. She started packing stuff up a few weeks ago, but she's been talking about coming to stay with Aunt Audrey since Christmas. Christmas. 4 months ago. The revelation hit me like a bucket of cold water. This wasn't a sudden burnout or impulse decision. Brooke had been plotting this for months. Dylan, is there something else going on? Something your mom hasn't told me? His little shoulders tensed. I'm not supposed to talk about home stuff. Mom says family business stays in the family. Before I could gently press further, my phone rang, my parents' number flashing on the screen. Audrey, is Brooke with you? My mother's voice sounded worried. We've been trying to reach her for days. She's staying with me, I confirmed, watching Dylan pretend to read while clearly listening. She didn't tell you. No, we thought, my mother paused. We were worried something had happened. Her landlord called us looking for her. Said she hasn't paid rent in 3 months. The pieces were starting to come together, but I needed to see the full picture. I'll have her call you, I promised, before ending the call. After dropping Dylan off with my neighbor, Mrs. Wilson, who'd kindly agreed to keep an eye on him for a few hours, I returned to my apartment and did something I'd never normally consider. I searched through Brooke's belongings. In the side pocket of her largest suitcase, I found a stack of papers that made my stomach drop: 3 months of unpaid rent notices, an eviction warning, disconnection notices for utilities, credit card statements showing cash advances and balances well over the limits. But most disturbing was a folder containing gambling receipts from a casino in Indiana, along with payday loan documents with astronomical interest rates. Brooke hadn't quit her job. The final notice from Memorial Hospital made that clear. She'd been terminated for violation of medication protocols and suspected theft. As I continued searching, my hands shaking with anger and disbelief, I found her phone charger plugged in beside my bed. The notification preview on her screen revealed the final piece, a text exchange with someone named Jen from months ago. Audrey's the perfect target, Brooke had written. Single, successful, no kids to compete with Dylan for attention. Hasn't been around enough to know what's really going on. I give it 3 months before I can convince her to let me move in permanently. She's always had that big sister guilt complex. I sat on my bed, surrounded by evidence of my sister's deliberate deception, when I heard the front door open. Brooke's voice called out cheerfully, "I'm back. Where's Dylan?" When she entered the bedroom and saw the papers spread across the bed, her expression shifted from confusion to rage in an instant. "You went through my things," she hissed. "What gives you the right?" "You've been planning this for months," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the turmoil inside. "You didn't quit. You were fired for stealing. You're hiding from an eviction, drowning in gambling debt, and you targeted me as your meal ticket." Brooke's face hardened into something unrecognizable. "You don't understand anything about my life. It's easy to judge from your perfect apartment with your perfect job." "Stop it, Brooke. The manipulation isn't working anymore. I want you out of my apartment by tomorrow." Something dangerous flashed in her eyes. "And where exactly am I supposed to go with my son? The streets? That's not my problem. You created this situation, not me." She pulled out her phone. "Fine. I'll just let Mom and Dad know how their precious firstborn is throwing their grandson out into the cold. I'm sure they'll love hearing how little family means to you." Before I could respond, she was already dialing, tears suddenly streaming down her face as she put the phone on speaker. "Mom." Her voice transformed into a broken sob. "I need help. Audrey's kicking us out. She says she doesn't care if Dylan and I have nowhere to go." And just like that, with a single call, Brooke executed her first major betrayal, twisting the situation completely and unleashing a family storm that would only grow more intense. The next morning, I was awakened by persistent, aggressive knocking on my front door. Bleary-eyed and still processing yesterday's revelations, I wrapped myself in a robe and stumbled to answer it, only to find myself face to face with my parents. "Mom, Dad, what are you doing here?" I asked, genuinely confused. They lived 3 hours away in Milwaukee and never visited without weeks of advance notice. My mother brushed past me, her eyes scanning my apartment critically. "Where's Brooke? Where's Dylan?" "Still sleeping," I said, closing the door behind my father, who hadn't yet made eye contact with me. "It's not even 8 o'clock. What's going on?" My mother's expression was a familiar one, the same look she'd given me when I was 16 and came home past curfew. Disappointment layered with righteous anger. "Sit down, Audrey," she commanded, as if this were her house and not mine. "We need to have a family discussion." Before I could protest, Brooke emerged from my bedroom, eyes puffy and red, as if she'd been crying all night. She ran straight to our mother's arms. "Thank God you're here," she whimpered, playing the victim to perfection. The next hour unfolded like a well-rehearsed play where everyone knew their lines except me. My parents had driven through the night after Brooke's tearful call, convinced I was heartlessly evicting my struggling sister and innocent nephew. How could you be so cold? My mother demanded. After everything this family has done for you? Everything the family has done for me, I repeated incredulously. I worked my way through college while you paid Brooke's rent. I built my career while you bailed her out of every crisis. What exactly has this family done for me except expect me to succeed on my own while rescuing her from every consequence? That's not fair, Audrey. My father finally spoke, his voice carrying the weight of authority he'd always wielded in family conflicts. Your sister has a child. Her challenges are different. Her challenges are self-created, I countered, reaching for my phone. Let me show you what I found yesterday. Eviction notices, gambling receipts, proof she was fired for stealing. She's been planning this for months. Brooke's face twisted with panic for just a second before she composed herself. See, this is what she does, makes up horrible things about me because she's jealous I have Dylan and she's all alone. I scrolled through my photo gallery searching for the pictures I'd taken of the documents, but they were gone. Every single one. When I checked my deleted items folder, empty. Brooke used my computer last night, I realized aloud. She deleted the evidence. My mother sighed heavily. Audrey, these accusations are serious. If you can't prove them, maybe you need to consider why you're so determined to vilify your sister instead of helping her. The injustice burned in my throat. This was the pattern established since childhood. Brooke could do no wrong, and any attempt to hold her accountable was viewed as jealousy or cruelty on my part. Brooke needs support right now, my father said. Financial and emotional. She's going through a difficult transition. She's manipulating all of you, I insisted. Ask her about the gambling. Ask her about the medication theft at the hospital. Brooke's performance shifted seamlessly into righteous indignation. I can't believe you'd make up such horrible lies. I've never gambled in my life and I left the hospital because of burnout, something you wouldn't understand, since your precious career always comes first. My father placed a hand on my shoulder, his grip firm. Your mother and I have discussed this. We think you should help Brooke until she gets back on her feet. You have the space, the financial means, and the obligation as family, my mother added. I shrugged off my father's hand. Have you considered that maybe constantly rescuing Brooke is why she's 30 years old and still can't manage her life? That maybe she needs to face consequences for once? My mother's expression hardened. Is that what we did wrong with you, Audrey? Made you so cold and calculating that you'd throw your own sister and nephew out on the street? The conversation devolved from there with 3 against 1. Every point I raised was dismissed, every boundary I tried to establish labeled as selfishness. When I suggested my parents take Brooke and Dylan to their house instead, they had a ready excuse about their recent downsizing and lack of space. Besides, my mother said you're in a better position to help financially. And then came the second major betrayal. We've already given Brooke access to the family emergency fund, my father announced. The money your grandfather left for all 3 of you children. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. That money was supposed to be divided equally. For emergencies or education. This is an emergency, my mother insisted. And your brother already used his portion for grad school. You've never needed it, Audrey. You've always been independent. The way she said independent made it sound like a character flaw. The family emergency fund had been substantial, nearly $90,000 set aside by my grandfather for his 3 grandchildren. I'd been saving my portion as a down payment on a house. How much did you give her? I asked, dreading the answer. My parents exchanged glances. All of it, my father finally admitted. What was left? Your portion and some of ours. I felt something break inside me, not just the loss of the money, but the realization that my family saw me only as a resource, never as a person with needs of my own. Get out, I said quietly. All of you. This is my home, and I want you out. Audrey, be reasonable, my father started. Out, I shouted, surprising even myself with the volume and force behind that single word. Dylan appeared in the hallway, startled by the noise, his small face creased with worry. My mother immediately went to him, wrapping him in a protective embrace as if shielding him from me. "It's okay, sweetie. Aunt Audrey is just having a bad day." "No," I said, finding my resolve. "Aunt Audrey is finally standing up for herself. You have 30 minutes to pack your things and leave Brooke. Take Dylan to Mom and Dad's if you have to, but you're not staying here." The next half hour was chaos. Brooke dramatically throwing clothes into suitcases, my parents making urgent phone calls, and me standing firm despite their emotional warfare. When they finally left, my mother's parting words cut deeper than she could know. "I never thought you'd choose money over family, Audrey. Your grandfather would be so disappointed." After they left, my phone buzzed with messages from extended family, aunts, uncles, cousins, all expressing their disappointment in me, all working from Brooke's carefully crafted narrative. In less than a day, I'd been cast as the villain in my own life story, and the isolation felt crushing. Monday morning arrived with the promise of normalcy. With Brooke and the family drama physically removed from my apartment, I was determined to refocus on work, the one area of my life where merit mattered and manipulation had no place. Or so I thought. The first hint that something was wrong came when I stepped off the elevator onto my floor. Conversations hushed as I passed, and Kelly from accounting, who usually chatted with me about our shared love of true crime podcasts, suddenly remembered an urgent email she needed to send. By 10 o'clock, the strange behavior had become impossible to ignore. Colleagues avoided eye contact in the break room, and two people abruptly changed their lunch plans when I asked if I could join them. Just before noon, my direct supervisor Marcus appeared at my desk. "Audrey, can I see you in my office?" His tone was professionally neutral, but the tension around his eyes told me this wasn't about quarterly projections. Once the door closed behind us, Marcus sighed heavily. "Audrey, I consider you not just a valuable team member, but also a friend, which is why I wanted to have this conversation privately." My stomach tightened. "What's going on?" "We've received some concerning calls about your personal situation." He shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Normally, we wouldn't involve ourselves in an employee's private life, but when it potentially impacts work performance or raises concerns about judgment—" "What calls?" I interrupted, already suspecting the answer. "Who contacted you?" Marcus hesitated. "Your sister has called several times expressing concern about your mental state. She claims you're experiencing some sort of breakdown, that you've become financially controlling and potentially unstable." The third betrayal hit me like a physical blow. Brooke had targeted the one area of my life I'd managed to keep separate from family chaos. "She also mentioned you're under investigation for elder financial abuse regarding your grandfather's estate." Marcus continued, watching me carefully. "That's completely false," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "My sister is the one with financial problems. She's been evicted from her apartment, fired from her job for stealing medication, and has a gambling addiction. She's trying to discredit me because I refused to support her." Even as I spoke, I could hear how it sounded like a soap opera, not the life of a senior financial analyst who prided herself on stability and sound judgment. Marcus nodded slowly, but I could see doubt in his expression. "I understand, and I want to believe you. But HR has placed you on a performance improvement plan effective immediately. Your access to certain client accounts will be temporarily restricted until we can verify there are no concerns. You're restricting my access based on false accusations from my estranged sister." I couldn't keep the indignation from my voice. "It's standard procedure when questions of financial judgment arise," he explained apologetically. "Just until everything is cleared up." I left Marcus's office in a day's humiliation burning through me. At my desk, I discovered an email from HR outlining the performance improvement plan copied to the entire senior management team. Everyone would know. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. How's work going, sis? Thought your fancy colleagues should know who they're really working with. I deleted it immediately, hands shaking with rage. Brooke had found the one thing I couldn't simply walk away from: my professional reputation built over years of dedication and sacrifice. As I attempted to focus on the work, I was still permitted to do a light knock on my cubicle wall pulled me back to reality. It was Rachel from legal, holding 2 coffee cups. "Thought you might need this," she said, placing one on my desk. "And maybe someone to talk to who isn't buying into office gossip?" Rachel was newer to the company, and we'd worked together on only a few projects, but I'd always appreciated her straightforward approach. Over coffee, in the quiet corner of the office kitchen, I found myself confiding the entire situation: Brooke's manipulation, my parents' enabling, and now the workplace sabotage. "This isn't just petty family drama," Rachel said after listening intently. "Your sister is actively trying to destroy your life. Have you considered that this might be more than manipulation? This sounds like a deliberate campaign." "What do you mean?" "I worked on a case last year involving a similar pattern: family members systematically isolating someone to gain control of their finances. It was elder abuse in that case, but the tactics are similar. First social isolation, then professional discrediting, then financial dependence." Rachel's legal perspective helped me see the situation with new clarity. This wasn't just Brooke being Brooke, this was calculated strategic destruction. "You need to investigate further," Rachel advised. "Gather evidence about Brooke's past behavior. If she's done this before, there will be a pattern." As if on cue, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. I almost declined it, suspecting another family member calling to berate me, but something made me answer. "Is this Audrey Marshall? This is Mrs. Peterson, Dylan's teacher at Lincoln Elementary." The woman's voice was hesitant but determined. "I hope you don't mind me calling. Dylan listed you as his emergency contact on his latest enrollment forms, and I've been concerned about him." I felt a rush of concern for my nephew. Despite everything, Dylan was innocent in all this. Of course, what's going on? Dylan's attendance has been spotty all year, and when he does come to school, he's often unprepared, tired, and sometimes wearing the same clothes for days. I've tried reaching out to his mother multiple times, but she's become confrontational. Mrs. Peterson paused. "Yesterday, Dylan mentioned he was staying with his aunt in Chicago but might be moving again soon. He seemed very distressed about it." As Mrs. Peterson shared more details about Dylan's situation: incomplete homework, falling asleep in class, hoarding food from the cafeteria. A fuller picture emerged of what Brooke's parenting truly looked like beyond the performance she'd put on for family. "I should warn you," Mrs. Peterson added, "that your sister told the school administration you're not authorized to receive information about Dylan. She made some concerning claims about you. But Dylan speaks very fondly of you, which is why I decided to reach out anyway." By the time I hung up, the stakes had become crystal clear. This wasn't just about protecting my reputation or finances anymore. A child's well-being hung in the balance. Brooke wasn't just manipulating me. She was neglecting her son in the process. That evening, as I sat in my quiet apartment that still bore the lingering traces of my unwanted guests, a forgotten sock under the couch crayon marks on my coffee table, I made a decision. If Brooke wanted war, I would give her one. Not just for my sake, but for Dylan's. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. With my professional reputation already compromised, a missed day hardly mattered compared to what I needed to accomplish. I dressed in my most professional outfit, not the power suits I wore to intimidate in boardroom negotiations, but the subtly elegant ensemble I reserved for client meetings where trust was paramount. My first stop was Memorial Hospital, where Brooke had worked until recently. The sprawling medical center was familiar to me, only through Brooke's occasional complaints about long shifts and difficult patients. Now I was here to uncover the truth behind her departure. At the HR department, I was initially met with the expected privacy policies and polite refusals. We can't discuss personnel matters, the representative explained. But when I mentioned potential legal implications regarding child welfare and financial fraud that might involve the hospital, her demeanor shifted. I can't provide details, she said carefully, but I can confirm that Brooke Marshall's employment was terminated on March 7th, not 2 weeks ago, as you might have been told. The termination was classified as with cause, following an internal investigation. Was this investigation related to missing medications, I asked, recalling the vague wording in the termination letter I'd found. The woman's slight flinch confirmed it without her saying a word. I would suggest speaking with Diane Winters in pharmacy. Off the record, of course. Diane Winters, a pharmacy director with 20 years at Memorial, was more forthcoming after hearing my situation. Your sister was caught diverting pain medications on multiple occasions, she explained, in a quiet corner of the hospital cafeteria. Not just for personal use, we have resources for staff struggling with addiction, but the quantities suggested distribution. When confronted, she became hostile and threatening. Threatening how? Diane hesitated. She implied she would make accusations about other staff members if reported. Several nurses requested transfers to avoid working with her. I'm sorry to be blunt, but your sister has a reputation for manipulation that extends beyond the medication issues. My next stop was Brooke's apartment, or former apartment, according to the eviction notice I'd found. The building manager, a weary man named Phil, recognized Brooke's name immediately. Marshall in 3B. Left about 3 weeks ago, middle of the night. Owed 4 months' rent by then. He eyed me suspiciously. You? A relative? Sister, I admitted. I'm trying to piece together what happened. She's been staying with me, but I just found out about the eviction. Phil's expression softened slightly. Let me guess she told you some story about unfair landlords or building problems. When I nodded, he continued, she pulled the same routine with her previous landlord. I checked her references but missed the pattern. Pays for a few months, then starts with excuses, then stops paying altogether but refuses to leave until forced out. Do you know if she had any roommates before Dylan? I asked. There was a woman who used to live with her when she first moved in. Came by looking for mail a few months back. Jennifer or Jenny something. Said Brooke still owed her money. With Phil's reluctant help, I got Jenny's contact information. We met at a coffee shop that afternoon where she provided the fourth devastating betrayal of my sister's campaign. Brooke moved in with me after my previous roommate left suddenly, Jenny explained. Everything was fine for the first 2 months. She paid rent on time, kept to herself mostly. Then she lost her job, or so she claimed, and asked for extra time on rent. 1 month became 2, then 3. Jenny's story mirrored my own experience with alarming precision, but the worst was yet to come. When I finally insisted she pay up or move out, things got ugly. She stole my identity, opened credit cards, took out loans. By the time I discovered it, my credit was destroyed. She must have been going through my mail for months. My blood ran cold. Have you checked your credit report recently? I froze my credit after that disaster, thank God. Why? That evening, I ran a full credit check on myself. The results confirmed my worst fears. 6 new credit accounts opened in my name over the past 3 months, all maxed out, all delinquent. Over $30 0 inches fraudulent debt that was now destroying my credit score. The magnitude of Brooke's betrayal left me breathless. This wasn't opportunistic manipulation. This was premeditated destruction of my financial stability. I called Rachel, who immediately connected me with a lawyer friend specializing in identity theft and family law. Lawrence Green listened to my situation with professional detachment that I found comforting after days of emotional chaos. You have several legal avenues here, he explained. Identity theft is a criminal matter. Child neglect is another potential issue based on the teacher's report. But family courts get complicated, especially with grandparents involved. I'm not looking to punish my sister, I clarified. I just want to protect myself and potentially help my nephew. Lawrence nodded. Start documenting everything, every interaction, every discovery about past behavior. You'll need a paper trail. My college friend Marcus, not to be confused with my boss, now worked as a private investigator. He agreed to help me discreetly gather information on Brooke's recent activities. Casino records are private, he warned me. Over dinner at a restaurant far from my usual haunts, but I have contacts who can confirm if she's a regular at any of the major establishments in the region. Within 48 hours, Marcus provided me with surveillance photos of Brooke at 3 different casinos in the past month alone, including one from just yesterday when she was supposedly meeting with a job counselor. She's well known to the staff, he reported. Not a high roller, but consistent enough to get comps. She typically arrives early afternoon and stays until late evening. During school hours, I noted grimly. Where's Dylan during these gambling sessions? Marcus's expression darkened. Sometimes with her sitting in the hotel lobby. Sometimes appears to be alone in the car in the parking lot. The evidence of neglect made me physically ill, but I forced myself to continue the investigation. A deep dive into social media revealed Brooke had systematically targeted others before me, former friends, colleagues, even Dylan's father, whom Marcus helped me locate. Contrary to Brooke's claims that he'd abandoned them, Jason Parker had been fighting for visitation rights for years. When I finally spoke with him by phone, his frustration and worry poured out. Brooke told me Dylan was staying with your parents while she completed a nursing residency program, he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. I've been sending child support payments to your parents' address. Are you telling me he's been with her this whole time, missing school and sitting in casino parking lots? The web of lies extended further than I'd imagined. My parents' enabling had reached new heights. They'd been accepting child support payments for a grandchild who wasn't even staying with them. By the end of my week-long investigation, I had assembled irrefutable evidence of Brooke's pattern. The job termination documentation, statements from former roommates and colleagues, credit fraud reports, casino surveillance, and child welfare concerns. I'd also discovered that Brooke had done this before, moving in with people, exploiting them financially, then destroying their reputations when they tried to hold her accountable. I returned to my apartment to organize the evidence, only to find Brooke waiting outside my door. "Your doorman let me up," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We need to talk, sis." Her casual tone, as if the past week of sabotage hadn't happened, sent chills down my spine. Behind that smile, I sensed she knew I'd been investigating her. The predatory gleam in her eye told me she wasn't here to apologize. She was here to assess the threat I posed to her carefully constructed world of manipulation. "Yes," I agreed, unlocking my door with steady hands despite my racing heart. "We absolutely need to talk." The moment Brooke stepped into my apartment, I knew this would be different from our previous confrontations. Gone was the facade of the struggling single mother, replaced by calculated coldness as she assessed my living space like a general surveying a battlefield. "You've been busy," she remarked, trailing her fingers across my dining table where folders of evidence were neatly stacked. "Talking to my former colleagues, my landlord. I'm hurt, Audrey." "Where's Dylan?" I asked, noticing his absence. "With Mom and Dad. They're so much more supportive than you." She sighed dramatically. "Though they're running out of patience with you. Dad's considering removing you from his will if you don't come to your senses soon." I didn't take the bait. "I know everything, Brooke. The medication theft, the gambling, the identity theft. I've spoken with Jenny, with Jason." Jason, her composure slipped momentarily, genuine surprise flashing across her face. "You contacted Dylan's father." He had no idea Dylan wasn't staying with our parents. He's been sending child support money to them all this time, thinking his son was being properly cared for. Brooke's expression hardened. "You had no right to interfere in my relationship with my son's father. This stopped being about rights when you stole my identity and opened fraudulent credit accounts," I countered. Or when you left your 8-year-old alone in a car while you gambled away his lunch money. For a moment, I thought I'd gained the upper hand. But Brooke had always been adaptable, her manipulation style shifting like quicksand beneath your feet just when you thought you'd found solid ground. Dylan loves those special casino days, she said, her voice softening. The nice security guards check on him, bring him snacks. He gets to watch all the videos he wants on my phone. It's our special arrangement. The casual way she justified neglect left me speechless, but Brooke was already moving on, picking up a framed photo from my shelf, me receiving an industry award last year. You've always needed validation from strangers, she mused. Always so desperate to prove yourself better than family. It's sad, really. She replaced the photo and wandered toward my bedroom. I followed, unwilling to let her out of my sight in my own home. I came to get the rest of our things, she announced. Dylan misses his favorite hoodie. Your things were packed and sent to Mom and Dad's house days ago, I said. There's nothing left here. Brooke's eyes narrowed. Not everything. I left some personal items in your jewelry box. The realization hit me too late. I rushed to my dresser, yanking open the small drawer where I kept my most valuable pieces, my grandmother's pearl earrings, the vintage emerald ring I'd bought myself after my first promotion, the diamond pendant from my people. 21st birthday. All gone. Looking for something, Brooke asked innocently. The fifth betrayal cut deeper than I expected. Those pieces weren't just valuable, they were irreplaceable connections to moments that had shaped me. You sold my jewelry, I said flatly. It wasn't a question. Borrowed, Brooke corrected. I have some debts that couldn't wait. I'll replace everything once I'm back on my feet. Like you replaced Jenny's credit score, or Jason's years with his son. Her smile vanished. You think you're so perfect, don't you, Miss Success Story, with her fancy job and spotless apartment. But you're nothing without family, Audrey. Nothing. Get out, I said quietly, before I call the police and report the theft and credit fraud. Brooke laughed, the sound brittle in the silence of my bedroom. Go ahead. It's your word against mine, and I have two heartbroken parents ready to testify that you've become unstable, vindictive, even dangerous. Who do you think the police will believe? After she left, I installed security cameras in my apartment, small, discreet devices in the living room, kitchen, and hallway. I changed all my passwords, placed a fraud alert on my credit report, and began the painstaking process of disputing the fraudulent accounts. But Brooke was always a step ahead. Within days, she was back with Dylan in tow, using my nephew as an emotional shield against any confrontation. He misses his auntie, she explained sweetly as Dylan stood uncomfortably beside her. I thought we could have a family dinner start fresh. Despite my better judgment, I couldn't turn away Dylan. His eyes lit up when he saw the new books I'd bought for him, age-appropriate novels that challenged his precocious reading level, and for a brief moment it felt like maybe, just maybe, we could salvage something from this mess. That illusion shattered after dinner when I went to take a work call and returned to find Brooke going through my desk drawers. What are you doing? I demanded. Just looking for a pen, she replied smoothly. Dylan wanted to draw you a picture. But the drawer she was rifling through contained my passport and social security card. The psychological warfare had moved beyond manipulation into something darker. The cameras proved invaluable. They captured Brooke searching my apartment when I stepped out, attempting to access my laptop, and most disturbingly, coaching Dylan to tell me how scary it was staying with his father during a recent visit, a visit I knew hadn't occurred because Jason was documenting his ongoing struggle for visitation. My attempt to talk to Dylan directly about what was happening was met with fearful silence. His loyalty to his mother, despite her behavior, broke my heart. Years of conditioning had taught him that questions meant danger, that secrets were safety. You can always call me, I told him quietly during a rare moment alone. No matter what, I'll answer. He nodded solemnly but didn't meet my eyes. The gaslighting intensified. Items in my apartment moved mysteriously between visits. Work documents disappeared from my briefcase. Once I returned from a shower to find all the clocks in my apartment set to different times. "You seem stressed," Brooke observed with mock concern when I confronted her. "Maybe you should talk to someone professional about these paranoid thoughts." My parents remained firmly under her spell, suggesting I was working too hard imagining conflicts, possibly in need of medication myself. Another family meeting became a rerun of the previous ambush, with one key difference: Brooke's lies began contradicting each other. "You never sent Dylan's things," she accused at one point. "But you just said last week that you donated them because they were too small," our mother pointed out, momentarily confused. Brooke recovered quickly. "I meant his favorite toys, not the clothes." It was a minor slip, but I noticed my father's fleeting frown. The first crack in her perfect victim narrative. Still, their suggestion that I must have provoked Brooke's behavior somehow was the final straw. I stopped attending family gatherings entirely, focused instead on documenting every interaction, building my case piece by meticulous piece. Then came the breaking point. After a particularly grueling day fighting with the credit bureaus over the fraudulent accounts, I returned home to find my apartment door slightly ajar. Inside the place had been ransacked drawers, emptied furniture, overturned walls defaced with cruel messages in what looked like lipstick. In the middle of the destruction sat Dylan alone, and terrified, clutching his backpack. "Mom said to wait for her here," he whispered when he saw me. "She said she just needed to take care of something important." The casino, I realized with sickening clarity. She'd left her 8-year-old son alone in a vandalized apartment to go gambling. The final line had been crossed. "We can't stay here," I told Dylan, gently helping him up from the floor where he'd been sitting among the wreckage of my living room. "Let's go somewhere safe while we figure things out." His small hand in mine felt like both a responsibility and a lifeline as I guided him out of the building and into an Uber headed for Rachel's apartment. My colleague had offered her guest room as a safe house if things escalated, and this destruction certainly qualified. "Is Mom in trouble?" Dylan asked quietly, as the city lights blurred past the car window. I chose my words carefully. "Your mom is having a hard time making good choices right now. But we're going to make sure everyone gets the help they need, including her." That evening, while Dylan slept in Rachel's spare bedroom, I made the call I'd been preparing for over the past weeks. Jason Parker answered on the second ring, his voice alert, despite the late hour. "She's escalated to property destruction and abandonment," I explained, keeping my voice low to avoid waking Dylan. He was alone in my ransacked apartment. "I think it's time to involve the authorities." "I'm on my way," Jason said, without hesitation. "Text me the address. I can be there by morning." The man who arrived at Rachel's door early the next day looked nothing like the deadbeat father Brooke had described throughout Dylan's life. Jason Parker was clean-cut with kind eyes that carried too much worry. When Dylan emerged sleepily from the bedroom and saw him, the boy froze. "Dad." The emotional reunion that followed Dylan's initial hesitation melting into recognition and then tentative joy confirmed what I'd suspected. Brooke's narrative of an uncaring father had been yet another manipulation. "I've been fighting for consistent visitation for 3 years," Jason explained once Dylan was occupied with breakfast and cartoons. "Every time we get close to a court date, Brooke disappears, changes addresses, makes new accusations. The system isn't equipped to handle someone so calculated. Together we created a battle plan. Jason would document Dylan's condition and file for emergency custody. I would pursue criminal charges for identity theft and property damage. But we needed more allies to counter Brooke's web of manipulation. Rachel, with her legal background, became our strategic advisor. Character witnesses will be crucial," she pointed out. "Brooke has been crafting her victim narrative for years. We need people who've seen behind the mask." My next recruitment came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Wilson, my elderly neighbor who had watched Dylan occasionally, turned out to be a retired family court judge. "I've observed concerning behavior," she confirmed, serving us tea in her impeccably kept apartment. The child left alone while she went on quick errands that lasted hours. The revolving door of men visiting when she stayed in your apartment during your work hours. I've been taking notes, actually. Old habits die hard. Those notes detailed dated observations from a respected former judge would prove invaluable. The most surprising ally came in the form of Brooke's ex-boyfriend, Michael, who contacted me after seeing my fraud alert when he tried to rent a car with their jointly held credit card. "She did the same thing to me 2 years ago," he explained during our coffee meeting. "Moved in seemed perfect at first, then gradually took over my life. By the end, I was the crazy one, the controlling boyfriend, while she systematically destroyed my finances and relationships." Michael brought with him documentation of the financial recovery process and restraining order he'd eventually secured against Brooke, evidence of a pattern I needed to establish. As our alliance grew stronger, I discovered the sixth and perhaps most painful betrayal: my parents' active participation in Brooke's schemes. "They've been cashing Jason's child support checks for over a year," my private investigator friend confirmed. "The money goes into a joint account they share with Brooke. Bank records show large withdrawals corresponding with casino visits." The revelation that my parents weren't just enablers but active participants in exploiting their own grandson shattered any remaining hope of reconciliation. They had chosen their role in this drama, and now they would face the consequences alongside Brooke. Our lawyer prepared restraining order documentation based on the property destruction and financial fraud. Child Protective Services opened a case after Dylan's school submitted their accumulated concerns. Each piece of the puzzle strengthened our position against the inevitable storm of accusations Brooke would unleash when cornered. We worked methodically, building our case in secret while monitoring Brooke's increasingly erratic behavior through the banking alerts I'd set up on the fraudulent accounts and social media monitoring. She seemed oblivious to the alliance forming against her, convinced her manipulation tactics had succeeded as they always had before. Then came the moment to implement our strategy. Jason filed for emergency custody with supporting documentation from school officials, Mrs. Wilson, and the evidence of abandonment in my apartment. I filed police reports for identity theft and property damage, complete with camera footage and financial records. Restraining orders were processed through the courts. Through it all, we kept Dylan at the center of our concerns. Rachel found a child psychologist specializing in family trauma, who began meeting with him, creating a safe space for him to process the upheaval. "Kids in these situations develop survival mechanisms," the psychologist explained. "Dylan has learned to anticipate his mother's moods, to make himself invisible when necessary, to be whatever version of himself will prevent conflict. That hypervigilance takes a toll." I saw evidence of this in the way Dylan carefully monitored adult facial expressions, how he apologized for needing basic necessities, how he hoarded food when he thought no one was looking. The psychological wounds would take time to heal. As our legal machinery moved forward, Brooke returned to my building, predictably enraged to find her access revoked and her belongings in storage as directed by my lawyer. "She's completely unhinged," my doorman reported after her third attempt to gain entry, "screaming that you've kidnapped her son, threatening to call the police." "Let her," I replied with newfound confidence. "We have everything documented." The alliance we'd built had given me something I'd been missing throughout this ordeal: validation that I wasn't crazy, that the manipulation was real, and that standing firm against it was the right choice. Not just for me, but for Dylan. When Brooke showed up at Rachel's apartment, somehow having tracked us down, likely through my parents, we were prepared. The restraining order was served on the spot by the private process server we'd had on standby, with police called immediately to enforce it when she refused to leave. "This isn't over," she hissed, as officers escorted her from the property. You have no idea what I'm capable of. I watched her leave feeling not the satisfaction I'd expected, but a complex grief for the sister I'd never truly had, a person who viewed relationships not as connections to nurture, but as resources to exploit. She'll escalate again before this is over, Jason warned as we watched the police car pull away. People like Brooke always do when they're losing control. He was right. Brooke was unpredictable in many ways, but in one aspect she was entirely predictable. When cornered, she would lash out with whatever weapon she had left, regardless of the damage to herself or others in the process. We braced ourselves for the final confrontation, knowing it would be the most dangerous moment in our campaign to break free from her manipulation. The legal mechanisms we'd set in motion created an artificial calm, a eye of the hurricane that lasted precisely 3 days. On the morning of the fourth day, while Dylan was at his therapy appointment with Jason, my phone exploded with notifications. Brooke had launched her counterattack on all fronts simultaneously. My parents arrived at Rachel's building demanding to see their grandson, causing enough of a scene that security called the police. My boss called to inform me that Brooke had shown up at our offices claiming I was suffering a psychotic break and stealing company information. Most alarmingly, 3 separate family members forwarded emails, supposedly from me, containing rambling threats and bizarre accusations, emails I had never written. She's going nuclear, Rachel observed grimly as we watched the chaos unfold from her living room. This is actually good. She's making mistakes. The seventh, and what Brooke likely intended as her most devastating betrayal, came in the form of a call from the police department. She had filed a report claiming I had threatened self-harm and blamed her in a suicide note sent to family members. We're required to follow up on these claims, the officer explained, when they arrived at Rachel's apartment. Though I should mention, we've received 3 other reports involving Miss Brooke Marshall this week alone, all with inconsistencies. The documentation we'd so carefully assembled proved invaluable in that moment, establishing both pattern and motive for Brooke's false report. The officers left with copies of our evidence and a much clearer picture of the situation. By evening, the legal team had advised us that the family court judge wanted all parties present the following morning, an unusually rapid response that suggested the severity of the situation had registered within the system. Be prepared for absolutely anything, our lawyer warned. Based on her pattern, she's likely to make dramatic accusations when cornered. I barely slept that night, my mind racing through every possible scenario, every lie Brooke might tell, every way the system might fail us despite our preparations. By dawn, I felt oddly calm, the clarity that comes from having nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, the fluorescent lighting harsh against the worn wooden furnishings. Our team arrived early, taking positions as directed by our attorney. Jason sat with Dylan in a separate waiting area, with the court-appointed guardian ad litem shielding him from the immediate confrontation. When Brooke entered with our parents, I barely recognized her. Gone was the casual entitlement, replaced by a carefully constructed image of maternal fragility. She wore a modest dress, minimal makeup, her hair pulled back simply. The perfect picture of an overwhelmed single mother being persecuted by her vindictive sister. What she hadn't anticipated was the comprehensive nature of our evidence or the number of witnesses prepared to testify to her pattern of behavior. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, began by establishing ground rules. This is not a trial but an emergency hearing to determine temporary custody arrangements and protective orders. I expect complete honesty from all parties, and I have very little patience for theatrics. Our lawyer presented first, methodically outlining the documented pattern of financial exploitation, child neglect, and escalating harassment. Bank records showed the misused child support. School records detailed Dylan's chronic absences. The security footage from my apartment captured both the destruction and Dylan's abandonment. When Brooke's turn came, she launched into her prepared narrative of persecution and misunderstanding. My sister has always been jealous of my relationship with our parents and my son, she began, tears welling perfectly on cue. When I turned to her for help during a difficult time, she saw an opportunity to take control and turn my family against me. She spun an elaborate tale of my supposed mental deterioration, my obsession with taking Dylan from her, and my financial manipulation. It was a masterful performance that might have worked if not for the mountain of evidence contradicting every claim. The turning point came when she claimed I had fabricated the destruction of my apartment to frame her. I would never vandalize property or abandon my son, she insisted. Audrey staged the whole thing to strengthen her case. The judge interrupted. Miss Marshall, we have security footage from the building showing you entering the apartment alone with your son and leaving without him shortly after. Are you claiming this footage has been falsified? Brooke hesitated, clearly unprepared for this level of scrutiny. I just stepped out briefly to get medication. Audrey is twisting everything. The timestamps show you were absent for over 4 hours, the judge noted, reviewing the evidence. And your bank records show a substantial cash withdrawal at Blue Sky Casino during that time frame. I watched as Brooke's carefully constructed facade began to crack. Her eyes darted around the courtroom, likely calculating her remaining options. Our parents shifted uncomfortably beside her, their expressions suggesting they were finally glimpsing the truth they'd spent years denying. As questioning continued, Brooke's responses became increasingly contradictory and defensive. When confronted with the fraudulent credit accounts, she first denied knowledge, then claimed I had authorized her to open them, then suggested they must have been created by an identity thief targeting both of us. The judge's patience visibly thinned with each shifting explanation. Then came the moment that would ultimately break Brooke's performance entirely. The doors opened, and Dylan entered with Jason and the guardian ad litem. Seeing her son unexpectedly, Brooke immediately shifted personas, her voice rising with dramatic concern. Dylan, baby, are you okay? Has she hurt you? She started toward him, ignoring the bailiff's instruction to remain seated. Dylan shrank back against his father, his small face tight with anxiety. The reaction spoke volumes. Miss Marshall, return to your seat immediately, the judge ordered. Instead of complying, Brooke escalated, her voice rising to a shrill cry. See how afraid he is. She's turned my own son against me. She's poisoned everyone. As the bailiff moved to intercept her, Brooke made her final desperate play, the threat she'd been holding in reserve. If you take my son from me, I'll kill myself, and it will be your fault, Audrey. Is that what you want, another death on your conscience? The courtroom fell silent at this alarming declaration. The judge signaled for Dylan to be removed from the room, then fixed Brooke with a penetrating stare. Miss Marshall, threats of self-harm are taken extremely seriously in my courtroom. I'm ordering an immediate psychiatric evaluation before we proceed further. As court officers approached, Brooke's performance collapsed entirely. Her carefully controlled demeanor gave way to raw fury as she realized her usual tactics had failed. You think you've won, she spat in my direction. This family was broken long before I came along. I just exposed what was already there. Our parents, witnessing Brooke's meltdown firsthand for perhaps the first time, sat frozen in apparent shock. Years of enabling and denial confronted them in that moment with undeniable clarity. As Brooke was escorted from the courtroom for the mandated evaluation, still hurling accusations and threats, my father's eyes met mine briefly. I saw something I'd never expected recognition, not just of what Brooke had become, but of their role in creating it. The judge issued temporary orders granting Jason emergency custody of Dylan with supervised visitation for Brooke, contingent on mental health evaluation and treatment. The restraining orders against Brooke were extended to protect both me and Dylan. My parents were ordered to cease contact with Dylan, pending further investigation of their role in the financial improprieties. Outside the courthouse, as rain began to fall on the gray concrete steps, I stood alongside the unlikely alliance that had helped reveal the truth. The victory felt hollow in many ways. Family ties severed, trust shattered, a child traumatized by adult dysfunction. Yet beneath the grief ran a current of something like hope. "What happens now?" Rachel asked as we watched Jason gently guiding Dylan toward their car, the boy's small hand tucked securely in his father's. "We heal," I replied simply. "All of us in whatever way we can." 6 months later, I stood in my kitchen watching the morning light filter through new curtains. The apartment had been repaired, repainted, and in many ways reinvented, much like my life. The silence that once felt like solitude now felt like peace. My phone chimed with a text from Jason. "Dillon got an A on his science project. He's asking if you can come to the school exhibition tonight." I smiled, typing back a quick affirmative. These small moments of normalcy had become precious landmarks on our collective journey toward healing. In the aftermath of that final confrontation, the full extent of Brooke's manipulation had come to light. The psychiatric evaluation had diagnosed her with multiple conditions requiring intensive treatment. Rather than face criminal charges for identity theft and child endangerment, she had agreed to enter a residential treatment program specializing in gambling, addiction, and personality disorders. My financial recovery had been painstaking, but steady. Most of the fraudulent accounts had been closed, though my once perfect credit score would take years to rebuild. The jewelry remained gone, sold to unknown pawn shops and buyers, but I'd made peace with that loss. Objects could be replaced. Trust was the more valuable commodity. My relationship with my parents existed in a complicated limbo. After the court hearing, they had retreated to their home in Milwaukee, initially maintaining their support of Brooke despite all evidence. But 3 weeks later, my father had called a stilted, difficult conversation that nonetheless represented their first acknowledgement of reality. We might have overlooked some things, he'd admitted, the understatement so massive it would have been comical in another context. "Your mother and I are trying to understand how it got to this point." I had responded with honest but measured words. "It got to this point because Brooke needed help you weren't equipped to provide, and instead of recognizing that you enabled behaviors that hurt everyone, including her." The conversation hadn't resolved decades of dysfunctional patterns, but it had opened a door that had previously been sealed shut. We now spoke monthly, carefully navigating the fractured terrain of our family history, attempting to build something healthier from the ruins. Most importantly, Dylan was thriving under Jason's care. The hypervigilance that had marked his behavior gradually eased as stability became his new normal. He attended therapy weekly, learning that his mother's choices weren't his fault or responsibility. He still asked about her, still loved her with the complicated devotion of a child for a flawed parent. The court had recently approved supervised visits between Dylan and Brooke contingent on her continued participation in treatment. Jason had asked me to attend the first meeting as an additional support person, a request that honored the bond Dylan and I had formed through crisis. My professional life had stabilized after the initial upheaval. With Brooke's claims thoroughly discredited and my own transparency about the situation, my company had removed the performance improvement restrictions and offered support during my recovery process. My boss, Marcus, had become an unexpected advocate implementing new policies to protect employees experiencing family crises. This evening would mark another milestone, the first family dinner with all the new boundaries and relationships in place. Jason and Dylan, Rachel and her husband Mrs., Wilson and even my parents, who were making the drive from Milwaukee in a gesture of tentative reconciliation. And yes, Brooke would attend as well, accompanied by her treatment sponsor. 6 months of intensive therapy had produced changes that seemed promising, if fragile. She spoke of accountability now, of recognizing patterns and triggers. Whether these changes would endure remained to be seen, but I approached the possibility with cautious optimism rather than cynicism. The damage Brooke had caused couldn't be undone, but moving forward didn't require forgetting or even forgiving every hurt. It required only the willingness to establish healthier patterns and maintain boundaries that protected everyone involved. Later that day, I helped Dylan arrange his science project materials on the kitchen table. His experiment on plant growth in different light conditions had consumed his interest for weeks. "Aunt Audrey," he asked, as we organized his carefully labeled specimens, "do you think Mom will like my project?" "I think she'll be very proud," I answered honestly. "You've worked really hard on it." He nodded, satisfaction brightening his expression. "Dad says Mom is working really hard, too. On getting better." "She is," I confirmed. "And that takes courage." Dylan considered this with the solemn thoughtfulness that sometimes made him seem older than his 9 years. "Is it okay that I still love her? Even after everything?" The question pierced straight to the heart of what we were all navigating, the complexity of loving someone who had caused harm. I knelt to meet his eyes directly. "Love isn't something you need permission for, Dylan. Your mom made mistakes, serious ones, but that doesn't erase the good parts or make your feelings wrong. We're all learning how to love each other in healthier ways now." He absorbed this with a slight nod, returning to his project with renewed focus. In that ordinary moment, aunt and nephew working side by side on a simple school assignment, I felt the truth of what we'd all discovered through this painful journey. Sometimes the strongest family ties are the ones we rebuild after they've been completely broken. Have you ever had to set boundaries with a difficult family member? How did you navigate that challenging situation? I'd love to hear about your experiences in the comments below. And if you found value in my story today, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel for more real-life experiences. Sharing these stories helps us all feel less alone in our struggles. Thank you for spending this time with me today. Remember, protecting your peace isn't selfish, it's necessary. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next video.